second meeting on testing and verification in computational science. It's really awesome to see you all. There's a lot of faces I don't know, which is really, really great. So our plan with this meeting was to bring together people from different areas, from different communities. So it's really great that I don't recognise most of you. A few years ago, we started this project in the computer lab here, where a few of us who were programming language and verification people were saying, we should really start designing tools that can help people in science getting things done, writing numerical models. We should write tools that help them, and why aren't we doing that? Why are we not having conversations with physicists and chemists and biologists? Why are we not doing that? So we sort of set up this project and we started these meetings to bring together computer scientists and physical and natural scientists who are interested in the problem of getting programs right, program correctness, making sure that our models do what we think they do and predict the things we think they predict. So it's the second year of running this meeting, we've got a really exciting program, lots of mix of different talks from different angles, so that's really exciting. So we hope that today we'll start a dialogue or continue a dialogue between the people here, and we can help each other out writing correct software. So a few sort of housekeeping things. You see there's coffee and tea and biscuits at the back, and if you haven't made yourself a name tag, please do that at some point. We've got a few breaks at various times. The talks, if you're giving a talk, please stick to 20 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions. Matthew and I will be chairing, and we'll have these nice signs to sort of hassle you. So if you see us at the front going like this, that means you've got 5 minutes left, and 1 minute left, so that would be great. I have to tell you that if there's a fire, then you should just go out this door, turn left, and basically go out the way that you came to get in here. If you need a toilet at any time, they're just downstairs, opposite the bottom of the stairs. What else do I have to say? So if you're coming to dinner tonight, we will walk all together from here to Queen's College, which takes about 25 minutes. We'll leave about 6:15 and sort of head down there, then we'll have some drinks and then dinner. If you didn't sign up for dinner, we have one spare ticket. I think it's a vegetarian ticket. I don't know if that changes anything for you, but if you didn't sign up and you're thinking you might like to stick around for dinner, then come and see me at some point. We've got a video camera here. Our plan is to put these videos on YouTube because we've had a few people say they wanted to come but couldn't. So if you're giving a talk, we have these like video release forms, standard things. So if you're okay with that happening, then you can sign that to let us know. And if you're not sure yet because you need to check with collaborators, then just let us know and we'll figure that out afterwards, what people are happy with going online. So for our first slot, we have a keynote speaker. We have Konrad Hinsen here. He's a research scientist at Centre de Biophysique Moléculaire in Orléans. He's also an associated scientist at the Synchrotron Soleil in Saint-Aubin. And he's published widely in biophysics, but also on issues of reproducibility and verification in computational science. He's he's a co-editor of the journal Computing in Science and Engineering, so some of you may have come across him in that capacity as well. So it's really great we've got him speaking today. He's going to be talking to us about this long road from ideas to bits and back, a traveller's guide to verifiable computational research. So over to Konrad. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I thought I would start, I'll start of course with the title. You've already seen it, so I can switch to the next slide. I've seen people in medical research do statements of conflicts of interest before they start. I don't think I have any, but I think it's a good idea in a mixed audience like here to say where I come from and what my point of view on this whole business is. So my background is physics, theoretical physics. I started out in statistical mechanics, then moved into biomolecular simulation, biophysics, and at some point the bad experiences with bugs and undocumented features got to the point where I started to lose faith in computational science and said, there's two things: either I go back to pencil and paper work or I do something about it. So I decided to do something about it, and what I'm going to tell you today is more or less the result of many years of part-time reflection on the problems and potential solutions. Also, my point of view, which you may or may not agree with, but I mean it explains perhaps many of what I'm going to say. I think we are pretty much at the end of the pioneer age of computing, where pioneer age was, hey, great, cool new stuff, I did this, hey, great, and so on. I think we are living in a time of shift towards more mature practices and dependable work rather than just cool new things. That means we need to let go of some legacy tools and methods we have gotten used to and we have come to love, unfortunately. And we should start avoid piling up technical debt in order to get out of last year's problem by creating a new one. So, in other words, I'm taking a long-term perspective and saying how could we do things better, even if this is maybe not something we can do within a 2-year project. Okay, so the overview of my presentation. I'll talk first about verification and validation of scientific models, in particular those that exist in the computer. While the title won't make much sense until I get to it, and in the end, the third part, I will look at the distinction between programming for science and doing science using computers. And all these three are 3 different roads that end in my plea for using digital scientific notations, which you probably never heard of, that's okay. And I'll quickly present my attempt at this, although this is very experimental for the moment. So, verification, validation. The first is part of this meeting. Validation isn't, but you have to, before you start discussing, you should be clear about which is which and make the distinction clear, because this is part of the problem sometimes. So yeah, science. What is science? Science is should be verifiable. The problem is human nature is not. And people make mistakes and people have biases. So we don't necessarily do things all the time exactly what is needed to find the truth. And there was a workaround that was discovered a couple of centuries ago. That's not that long ago on the scale of human history. And the workaround is set up a social process inside a community of people working together for eliminating error and bias by checking each other's work. And this was called science. So this is absolutely not human nature, and that's why it was invented rather late. And you have to watch out permanently that people actually do this correctly, because our default behavior is to go back to believing what famous people or people in authority say and believe them. So this is something which is a bit fragile. One of the principles is that unverifiable claims are admissible, because if you can't check something, then well, it's just a claim. If nobody can check it, then you should eliminate it from the process. So then, if something can be verified, and it is, and it's checked again and again and again, well, it creates trust in the result. Nothing is ever proven. People can always make mistakes, and people who check things can make mistakes. But the more something has been scrutinized, the more the community trusts in it as a result. So this is the general overview. Yeah, I think the most famous early statement of this principle is in the slogan of the Royal Society, Nullius in Verba, don't take anybody's word for something. And this is what I found on the website as an explicit explanation for this. Back in those days, it was to withstand the domination of authority. It was not so much about mistake or say, don't believe somebody because it's famous. Even famous people make mistakes. Okay, appeal to facts and to experiments. No computation at those times. Okay, verification, validation. For some of you, this may be some very basic. Others may not have heard about the distinction at all. Verification is about mistakes. So it's up. Yeah. Verification is about mistakes. We all make mistakes, so we check the coherence of arguments, the technical regulatory procedures by various means, which I'll come to. Validation is about more subtle judgment of suitability. That's the famous saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So you have a given model, you have eliminated the mistakes, hopefully working with it. The question remains, what is it good for? So, and I'll come later to the question of why I talk about validation here, because the topic of this meeting is verification. So, in practice, how do we do this? There are many verification approaches, but overall arguments such as I did this for this and this reason, or I conclude this and this and this, well, these are checked by people reading and saying, I don't believe this. This is critical reading. Observations and experiments, the gold way to verify is independent replication. Have someone else do the same things again and see if the results are similar enough. For mathematical manipulations, good old theory before computers, it's double checking, it's saying, well, it's independent replication as well. Somebody else does the work again. And then we have computation, and I think my claim is to this day, we haven't really found good principles of what counts as successful verification of computational science in the scientific community, and this is why this meeting exists, among others. So what are the questions one should have specifically about computational results? The first question is the description of the author of some study in the paper actually complete and accurate? I mean, they say, we did this and we computed this and this. Well, is it really what they computed? And one point of attack that has crystallized in recent years to verify this is reproducibility. So if I can get all the software and data sets and I can actually rerun them and get the same results, well, then probably what they claim to do, they probably even did. It may be wrong, but at least the description is, I mean, we are talking about the same thing. Then other problems are other bugs in the software. Now, every software engineer will say, software, of course there is bugs. There's no bug-free software. But then how serious are they? And then, was the software used correctly? This is rarely talked about, but it's actually, if you look at the history of recent mistakes that became publicly known, famous mistakes in computational science, in many cases was actually incorrect use of software because people didn't understand what the software does. So you have to do some verification at the user interface. I found this old article, which I think is quite nice, of 1969, the very first issue of Computer Physics Communication. K.B. Roberts, who I've never heard of before, but theoretical physicist, said that the scientific community should always be able to verify that a published program will produce correct results, or that a published calculation is correct, in the same way that it can check the truth of scientific theories, mathematical theorems, or experimental measurements. And then he continues, says, unless this requirement can be met, the scientific literature may be gradually corrupted by undetected errors as it comes to relying more and more on computing. I think this is what has happened, unfortunately. The article is about the publication of scientific fortune programs and goes into the details of how they need to be documented and presented so that people can actually read them and check them. Of course, in those days, the programs were not of the same size as today. And that is, I think, one of the things one should not keep in mind in talking about verification and validation problems. In the 1960s, when scientific computing began, computations were long but simple. So you could typically add some parameter, you had some small n, you could check things by hand, like calculate an integral for a coarse resolution, and then you would replace the small n by a bigger and rerun. And you say, okay, I've tested this for small n, all I've changed is one number, this is probably going to be okay. So this was common verification at the time, and I think it was good enough for those days. But then, yeah, well, people used computation for bigger systems, more complex objective study, more complex models, more complex computational protocols, and of course more complex software. And now checking by hand is often no longer an option. There is no simple case to which you can reduce. Either there is no simple case which you can do by hand, or even if a simple case has been checked, that doesn't mean anything for the more complex case. So this is no longer an option. I'll give it as an illustration my own field of work, which is in molecular simulation. So the technique of molecular dynamic simulations is quite old. It was invented in the 60s, it's even heavily used in the 60s, 1960s. The principle is follow the motions of atomic nuclei, Newton's laws of motion, and the essential input is a model for the interactions between the atoms. Now in the 60s, that was things like liquid argon. One atom type, two parameters in the interactions. You could actually do these computations by hand. You could actually do a simulation of 3 atoms for 5 time steps by hand and check your program and read that. 30 years later, we had lysozyme, a small protein, underlined small. This is really the lower end of what people consider to be interesting for studying. And we had almost 2,000 atoms of 26 distinct types using one of the many models, so maybe 30 somewhere else, it doesn't matter. And there I counted it's almost 75,000 parameters. Even getting a list of those parameters is not a trivial exercise. And what's worse, these are parameters of some mathematical equation which you can't find. It's never written down. I don't know. I've never seen it. So the question is already, how do you verify software if you can't even write down what it's supposed to compute? I found this one. I can't really comment this, but I found this so nice. I found this in a paper, Complexity in Climate Models. Now, I don't know much about climate models, but what I do know tells me that each of these circles and so on is actually a system of coupled differential equations, and there are many of those. So I'm not sure that this has been written down completely anywhere either. I doubt it. Okay, part one of my small series of trying to shed some light on mysteries in computational science, and the one I think that people don't really think about it. Why do scientists trust their computations? We have our computers crash every day, our phones crash every day. We install critical updates for our web browsers once per week. And then we run our own computational software and say, oh yeah, okay, the result is nice. Instead of saying, is that correct? And again, I think there are actually good reasons how this happened, and I think it's interesting to wonder why this happened and where things went wrong. Actually, it worked pretty well in the early days. I had the fortune of talking to people who did molecular dynamics simulations in the 1960s. And they did check everything, and it worked, and they were happy with it. And then what happened is, again, with the complexification, mistakes are really obvious. I mean, the computer science people here may know this famous quote by Tony Hoare, who said there's two ways to build a software system. The complicated one is to make it so complicated there are no obvious deficiencies. And this is what happens here. I mean, not only in software, also in the real world. If you study something like a protein, I mean, there are some kinds of mistakes which are obvious, but most things that can go wrong will just give you a result that is 5% different. It's absolutely not obvious. Then, of course, we had published in parish culture, which doesn't really value verification. It's kind of, you have to get things out. So I think we just gradually got used to not verifying computations anymore. It was more and more difficult. We didn't really know how to do it. At the same time, nobody asked for it. So we just stopped doing all this. So that's my theory. But if somebody has a better explanation, I'd be happy to hear about this. Okay, that was a bit the philosophy. Now I will get into something a bit more concrete. So here's my caricature of scientific computation. You formulate the problem, then you make approximations until you can solve it. You write a program to do it, and you run it. So we need to verify all these things at some point, ideally. And let's start with a simple example, simple underlined. I'll come to complexity later on. You have this nice drawing of a solar system. You want to predict the future position of these planets, the problems that people were interested in the 16th and 17th century. So, just as an illustration of the different steps. So, first thing, physicists go to work. First of all, we assume that the universe contains nothing but our solar system. Otherwise, you can't solve anything, it's too big. So we neglect the influence of everything else. Second, okay, suns, planets, let's say they are points. Makes life simpler. Again, we neglect the influence of sizes and shapes and so on. And then we make a very concrete assumption, say, okay, let's assume things move according to Newton's laws of motion. At Newton's time, this was the best we knew. At Newton's time, I would have said this is an hypothesis. Today it's an approximation because we know it's wrong, in the sense that we know that it neglects effects which are relativistic and quantum effects, but people would typically say that at the level of a solar system they don't matter. It's partly true, but it's a different story. So, at this level, verification, validation. Verification was critical reading of the arguments. So if you say I neglect the influence of nearby galaxies, my colleagues will say yes. If I say I neglect the influence of the sun, they will say, come on, I don't believe you. So this is just critical reading. And then this consistency checks. This has been something in physics among the most important verification techniques at all levels in theory. It's things like checking units, dimensions, conservation laws. If you if you come up with equations for the solar system that don't conserve energy and momentum, then people will say validation is a more difficult matter. Are all these approximations good enough for real astronomical observations? The only way is actually to go further on, solve the equations, compare with observations, and see if it works. So at this stage, we can't do any validation. So what do we have at this stage? We have a model which is Newton's laws of motion, Newton's laws of universal gravitation. You've perhaps seen them in physics course, and the physicists among you have seen them even more intensively, but I think this is nothing surprising and certainly not new. You also need initial conditions to compute anything. For example, two observations at two different times of all the positions that will do for getting things set up. And with that, with all I've listed here, the path of all the planets, the orbits are all defined completely. All the past and the future, infinitely. Everything's settled. So we're done? No. It's nice to have something that defines our trajectories, but if you want to have numbers that you can compare to reality, you have to compute these things, and unfortunately this model doesn't let you compute anything. It's differential equations. So we cannot validate this model. It's incomplete. So what can we do? I have phase 2, but this is version A, the idealist approach, which I suppose most of you have never heard of, and that's why I've put it up here. Wouldn't it be nice if we could construct an algorithm that, given time t and an error bound epsilon, computes numerically a trajectory that stays within this error bound? No matter what time, no matter what epsilon? Actually, it is possible, you can prove it. As far as I know, it hasn't been done for Newton's equations, and the reason is that the required precision grows so rapidly with t that this will probably explode the memory limits of any computer very quickly, but I say probably because it hasn't been tried as far as I know. If you're interested in this, you can look at this book. I think we had all the slides, so you can click on this link and you can actually even get the text of the book. So it's a field of mathematics known as computable analysis, which is, I think, quite obscure, but quite interesting. But let's go to the realist stage, phase 2. And this is what is commonly known as numerical analysis, and this is, of course, much more part of everyday lives than computable analysis. So we make 2 more approximations. We replace differentials by finite differences. So we accept the discretization error in return for something we can solve. Okay, fair deal. And we make another one that is we approximate real numbers by floating point numbers. And again, we accept a round-off error in return for efficiency. I think the distinction is actually mostly historical, because this is also kind of discretization error, in fact. It's just that this has been done much, much earlier than this. People, the mathematicians who worked on numerical analysis before computers were actually not aware of the problems of real numbers and thought that just writing down some digit at some point was kind of okay. So they didn't have a clear notion of the approximation they were making. So this involves a couple of choices. You have to choose a finite difference scheme. You have to choose integration step size and a floating point precision. But then, yeah, that gives you something you can solve. Okay, verification, validation. Verification is the most basic thing. You check that if you go back to the continuous limit, step size to 0, precision to infinity, you get back Newton's equations. That's the typical thing every math textbook in numerical analysis would show you. Validation, well, you make different choices, you run these things, and you compare the results, and you look for some kind of convergence up to some level that's good enough for you. So validation is about good enough, not about right or wrong, but about good enough. So, are we done with this? Here it is, the numerical model. I've chosen one very simple discretization scheme. There are others which may be better. That's not the main point. So this is an iterative scheme. You have you compute the position at step n+1 from 2 past steps n and n-1. And well, this is exactly the law of gravitation. I've just put an n or index n on each quantity. So what we have, to be precise, we have positions which are now vectors of free floats for each point. We have an integration step size, which is a float as well. And yeah, the floating point precision, we will typically choose a single and double precision. I took typically standard. Or we can go to arbitrary ones if you use a library like MPFR, which I think for diagnosing problems is a very nice tool. What is mainly missing on this page is that floating point operations have this unfortunate property of being less, of not respecting all the mathematical properties of exact arithmetic, in particular not the order of operations matters. So it matters in which order you sum up n numbers. The result is not the same in each case. And there's no good way to write this down. But that aside, this thing specifies the result to the last bit. Nothing else. No, everything's clear. So we are done. Yeah, take a stack of paper and a pencil and we go through that, right? Or use a computer. So we go to the next start. And then we introduce two more approximations, which people never talk about. So, no, they never talk about them as approximations. And I think this is one of the problems of our field. Because you don't really write a program that computes what was on the previous slide. You always introduce optimizations, improvements, algorithmic changes during code optimizations. Various kinds, just to give an example, what is very common in this kind of business, or at least was in the early days, square roots were expensive to compute. So people would often not compute a square root, but use some lookup table with some coarse-grained approximation for a square root. That's an approximation, just like any other one, but they would not call it an optimization. They would not call it an approximation, they would call it an optimization. And then, of course, you have compilers. The compilers, compiler writers have understood that nobody understands floating point arithmetic. They said, okay, let's profit from that and do optimizations behind the back of the users, not tell them about it. And they believe it's inevitable, so let's do it, and then our code is even faster. So we have two levels of optimization, one done by a programmer, one done by a compiler. And again, this approximation, you accept different results and win for speed. It's a fair deal. The problem is they are a bit hidden. And then this was the first real trouble in this business. First, we have verification. How do you verify the software? Well, you have standard software engineering techniques. They are insufficient. The proof is that you have not, even if something that passes all tests and whatever you want, you still find bugs in the end. So it's insufficient. But the worst is that validation has become practically impossible. Validation means that you judge how good your approximations are, but if you can't even see them, and in particular, if you can't compute without them, then how do you validate them? So we have approximations which are not documented, and you can't opt out. So, and then we have this. This is the executable model. You see the bug? So, part 2 of my mystery section. I think this is one of the most discussed problems, at least in my corner of computational science. How do you test floating point code? It's never quite okay. Nobody knows how to do it. Then you do something, you have to do tests, so you do something, and it's never really quite satisfying, and it's quite common that when you change your code, your test fails, you change the test. Make it work again, just to get rid of it. I've done it, so I'm allowed to criticize this. So what are the problems? We have no full specification of the numerical model. As I said, we have this problem of the order of floating point model, which is not written down. So we have no ground truth to compare to. We have incomplete control over the executable model, which is the software, because people are doing, especially compilers, are doing optimizations behind our backs. So we don't have, this is often called bitwise reproducibility. I think this is just not reproducibility because there's nothing else than bit level. And yeah, the executable is unreadable, so you can't check it by looking at it either. So this is one part. I'll come back to this a bit later. And the related question is, why is it so hard to make scientific conclusions reproducible? You transfer your code to a different machine, you get different results, which everybody considers null. Again, this is incomplete control. It's pretty much the same. And then in addition, we cannot really archive and transfer the executable model at the binary level. So we have to pass through another compiler chain, which makes different approximations. So we actually don't run the same thing. We can't. One other point which I'd like to point out to is that notation matters, because verification is a collaboration between scientists and computers. And the human part, critical reading and double checking, that depends on human readable notations, which we have at the physics level, which we have almost at the numerical level, except for the floating point error, but absolutely not at the executable model, certainly not at the binary level, but even source code is, if you ever take a scientific software and try to reconstruct the equations from the source code, it's near impossible. So you can't really do peer review on software. I showed this statement by Mr. Roberts from 1969. This is absolutely not our reality. Today you have software journals where you can submit software for publication. They don't even ask the reviewers to check if the software is correct. It's not a topic. Correctness of software is something you don't talk about, because you know you can't check it. So peer review is not a solution. And then, yeah, we have this slight problem of complexity. We don't really study solar systems nowadays, but things like lysozyme or even bigger ones. And then, yeah, notations matter, fine, but even the physical model, you can't write it down. 70,000 parameters. It's, what do you do with that? So peer review is out. So nothing at this level can be checked by a human reader. Okay, that was the first part. I'll come to the second part, which is just a different point of view and a more general point of view. So I'm trying to abstract away from the concrete case I showed. And so this is a more general level view of the workflow of computational science. You start here, physical model, ideas, general ideas, you put them into forms of equations. You make numerical models, which you turn into software, which ends up manipulating bits in the computer. They come back and you get some results, which need to be interpreted, first the bits as numbers, and then the numbers as physical quantities, and hopefully you get physical insight in the end. So this is the full round we have to explore. And overall, very roughly, human verification matters most in this part of the range, and automatic verification works best at this end of the spectrum. And yeah, and then this is what I know that the term digital divide means something else in social sciences, but I think I can get it here for our field. It's okay. There's another thing, other aspect which is often overlooked or not quite properly understood, that there is an enormous separation line here. This is the world of bits, and this is about the world of atoms. Now, we live in the world of atoms, and physicists even study the world of atoms. We are so used to it that even though intellectually we know that the world of bits is different, we don't take care of it. So what is different? In the world of atoms, quantities are always with an error. Every value in physics, you talk about, you take a course in metrology, there's always a measurement has an error. There's no way to get over there. In the bit world, bits are exact. Comparisons are always at a tolerance. At the bit level, two bit patterns are the same or they're not the same. There's no notion of almost the same. Judgments in the world of atoms are good to bad with the transition. In the bit world, it's true or false. So I said, intellectually we all know it, but we don't act as if it were true. I often hear people say or think, software A is similar to software B. In particular, software version 2.1 is similar to version 2.2. There is absolutely no notion of similarity for software. At the very best, we can say two different pieces of software could be compatible or could implement the same specification, but nobody does specifications in computational science, so that's really not what they mean. So the idea of similarity is really just, it's basically the closing of the version number to be correct. This means nothing. Another common mistake is to think that if you get good results from a piece of software for input A, and then you use it for similar input B, you should get good results as well. And there's thousands of counterexamples. Again, I've put a few links here. The standard problem is overflow. Something works for 2 to the power 7 minus 1, but not for 2 to the power 7. This kind of stuff. And then there's also this idea of floating point arithmetic that is inherently imprecise. Nothing is imprecise at the bit level. You have IEEE standard 7454, which defines exact manipulations of bit patterns and everything you want to know. The imprecision comes in the interpretation. And then again, I think this is a very, very frequent mistake humans make all the time to confuse things for representations, objects and representations. So this is not a number, it's a decimal representation of a number, of a rational number to be precise. For those of you who think that's pi, please stop somewhere. And this is really a cognitive problem of human brains in general. This has been observed before. This is probably the most famous expression. René Magnet, so that this is not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe, you can't stuff it. And so yeah, this is creates a bit of trouble. And then from this point of view, I can revisit my list of mysteries. So why is testing floating point code so difficult? Well, testing is in the world of bits. The test passes or fails. It's verification, it's not validation, it's verification. It's right or not, or wrong. Floating point tests always include a validation aspect. It's always, when you take people, well, you can't get exactly the same result, there's always a bit different, it's good enough for me. But good enough is validation, it's not verification. Good enough is a judgment for my use, for my system, this is good enough. And you have to do that because there are approximations in the world of bits, outside of your control and in the world of bits. So you can't really run tests there because you have nothing that has to be exactly right equal. And again, a similar story for reproducibility. You have no complete specification of what you want to do before you move into the world of bits. So, nothing bad, okay. So there's no safeguard against mistakes done in the world of bits, alterations in the world of bits, bugs in software, opaque approximations like the floating point stuff, for example, or say collateral damage of code maintenance, which is bugs but also change specifications. So people improve a piece of software, except that for your specific case, the improvement changes the results and makes it wrong. There's no way to safeguard against it because, well, you don't really know what you want. There's no ground truth, so what can you ask for? And then this is now the point where I'll start at least to make a proposition for doing things better in the future, remote future. So let's take this borderline seriously and say we don't allow any approximations on the right-hand side. We work on this borderline. We put up something which is a nice specification of what we want, and then you can do automatic verification in this business, and our computer science friends will be happy about this. So we can do lots of research and papers on this forever. And we are happy because we'll get back the results, I hope. And on the left-hand side, it's the collaboration of scientists with software tools to check things in the world of atoms. So you go back to consistency checks, which on bigger things you would like to do automatically, by hand, like unit tests and so on. Computer algebra is a nice tool for that. So there are two ways to do computer-aided verification. This would be the fully automatic part, and this would be the computer-assisted human verification part. Now, that requires that you have, as I said, that you have a way to specify your model at this level. And this, for this, I propose something called, which I call the digital scientific notations, which are notations for models on the digital divide, which are formal languages. You want to pass through the world of bits, you want to have things which are precise, but they are specifications, not implementations, to get rid of a lot of baggage you don't really want to have. And that's probably the most unusual part, they're human readable and supposed to be embedded in plain text. And I'll just quickly show you what this might look like so that this becomes a little bit less abstract. So this is an example I've prepared for, I'll explain my digital scientific notation I'm working on in the end, but so this is really a text, and everything with the blue background is a specification basically. And all the stuff that is printed on blue background here is something you can in the end get as an XML file for machine processing later on. So this is what I think a digital notation should look like. It is like mathematical notation, you use it in a text for human readers. So this would be your paper, your textbook, your software documentation, whatever. This would be proofread and checked by a human scientist. And from then on, you could use automatic verification to go on in the world of bits. Okay, so this is my last study section, the last point, the third point of view on the problems of computational science. And first of all, some words about tools. There are many kinds of tools. There's cars, there's microscopes and web browsers. I've chosen some of an example. This is everyday life. This is science, but not computational. And this is computers. Actually, I wanted to put up a column with scientific software, but it was too depressing to fill it in, so I wouldn't. So the common point is that tools, they're kind of industrialized products, finished products in a sense. They have a designer, manufacturer, sometimes a maintainer and a user. I filled them in here. I said for scientific software, this is not so obvious. The main point is each of these people have a different view of their tool, different competences, different knowledge of their tool. And users in particular are the ones which have the most limited knowledge. For many reasons. One is, of course, if you had all this knowledge, you wouldn't buy a tool, you would do it yourself. So it's, the idea of a tool is that it's something made by someone else for wider use. It also means that tools are actually designed for a wide range of users. So every single user knows only a part of the tool because the rest of the tool is maybe not so important. So this is something to keep in mind. We are talking about software tools. So web browsers are software tools. So I don't know how Firefox works. I don't care. I don't want to know. I don't need to know. I just know to use it. So now let's look at computational science. This is a kind of overview of the software stack. You have the bottom layer of the hardware, some processor and so on. You have some operating system which is almost indissociable. You can't use one without the other one. The interesting parts for us are the other ones. You have a layer of non-scientific infrastructure, which is what we share with computer users elsewhere. Compilers are a nice example, but also file systems or whatever else. So that's operating system. Yeah, web browsers, for example. Yeah, they would be here as well. Then we have a scientific infrastructure, which is software written specifically for the needs of scientists, but not for a specific scientific domain, or not. So these things don't include any science. So BLAS is some things of linear algebra, HDF5 is data management, for those who don't know. SciPy, scientific Python, is a collection of general data structures and code that goes with it. So this doesn't include any science. So this is applicable to many things. Then we have domain-specific tools. You probably, unless you're on molecular simulations, you won't know the ones I've listed. You have your own there. And then there's a top layer, which is project-specific code. This is what you write for one research project. So this is scripts and notebooks and workflows and so on. We use all this stuff to solve a very specific problem. So these, I think, are tools in the sense I defined. They are done by someone else, professionals who know their job, hopefully. As a user, I look at them, I evaluate them, I see, are they good for me? Yes and no. I know how to evaluate them, but I couldn't build my own necessarily. Certainly not in a good way. The top level is more a computational protocol. It's absolutely not general. It's really what I did for this paper. And then there's a gray zone in between, which is a bit of a problem, which I'll come to later. These are not tools because you need to know what's inside if you want to use them. You need to know a lot about them. And they're also written mostly by scientists. Today, there's also research software engineers joining in, fortunately. But this is not something that is delegated to people you don't know. It's people yourself and people you talk to. So, tools. What users need to know about tools is everything required to interpret the results. That's in particular, if your tools, if you consider domain-specific tools, for example, you need to know the models and methods that are implemented. You need to know the approximations that have been made. You need to know the data models and formats to interpret the results. What users do not need to know nor want to know is all the technical details like optimization, memory management, in-memory data structures, parallelization, platform dependencies, you name it. I mean, it's all the stuff that causes a lot of trouble when you write software, but as a user, you don't want, as a user of a tool, you don't want to know this. At the other extreme, we have computational protocols. They do a very specific computation on specific data. They're absolutely not generalizable. If you want to reuse them, you have to read them, understand them, and change the things that change. So they're actually meant to be fully understood by their authors and by the readers. They are also mostly linear, occasional branching, simple loops. So they're actually, in terms of seen as software, they're actually simple. And of course, they make use of tools in the forms of libraries and software packages. But they're really very different things. So writing a tool and writing a protocol are completely different jobs, even though both are a way of making software. So let's look at the notations we have in computational science. We have programming languages, which are intended for software designers and manufacturers, which are done for expressing construction details of software tools. Actually, pretty good for that. They're not very good for doing computational protocols. Then we have, these are more recent things, notebooks and workflows. Before we had scripting languages, and they've kind of mutated a bit into more sophisticated user interfaces for scripts, which is what notebooks and workflows are. So they are intended for use by computational scientists to express computational protocols that use software tools. Now, the often problem is the gray zone in between, the domain-specific software. You want that to use the same language, same notation as the tools below it, and also the same language as the protocols above it. And somewhere there's a mismatch. And then, yes, there's in general the tool-protocol interface, which is a bit difficult to settle. And then again, my proposition is digital scientific notations. To write down the scientific models, the computational protocols, and so which become the user interface for software tools. So this is what a scientist should work with, and let the tools be handled by somebody more competent for the job. In an ideal world, which we're not living in at the moment. Yeah, this is the occasion to take my last mystery. I think many people in this room are interested in these kind of questions, so that's why I would like to bring it up. So, computer scientists always praise the virtues of static type checking. Computational scientists mostly say, looks interesting, yeah, maybe one day. And those who actually try it one day typically say, yeah, this looks interesting, and maybe one day it could be used and go back to the way they worked before. And I think the main reason is that people are actually looking at different worlds, different aspects of the problem. Type checking. What's the reason? Why should anybody care about type checking? Well, it's a bit like unit checking in physics. It's consistency check. It's a way to check that you have assembled building blocks into complex software correctly, or at least without a certain kind of mistake, which is nice. Huh? It's definitely a good idea. But research protocols have very few building blocks. Static type checking matters when you have complex control flow, when you have software that is so general that any given test will not necessarily run through all the path, and you might overlook a mistake if it's not verified at the source code level. Again, a research protocol, there's no dead code in there. You run it once, you have executed every single line. So you don't really gain much in terms of verification through static time checking. You may gain a bit in terms of performance because you may catch your mistake a bit earlier rather than later. But it's absolutely not as important as for building complex software tools. And then finally, today's type systems are absolutely not adapted to the needs of computational science. Typically, types are derived from in-memory data representations. If all you do, if 80% of your data is float, isn't really much to check about it. And finally, which I think is the most interesting point, it doesn't actually catch the typical mistakes in research protocols. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any serious research on what typical mistakes are. I only have my anecdotal evidence from what I've done myself, which is a nice exercise I've been doing for quite a while, quite regularly. It's independent replication. I said, okay, let's do the top layer, the research protocol, twice independently, as we do for an experiment and so on. I've done it twice in real research projects. I've done one version and somebody else has done a different version, really from scratch. We don't talk about each other about how we do things, different languages, different computers, and even different cities typically. And in the end, everybody checks, both parties check their code to the end. And when they're happy with it, we compare. You never find the same result, never. And I've done it more often with students as an exercise, over 1 week sessions. Never 2 people find the same result, not once. Forget it. And what are the typical mistakes? The most important one is mistakes in transcribing the math to the logic to code. You don't catch it with anything. You can compute twice the energy. It's as reasonable as computing the energy. No automatic verification will find this. You're solving the wrong problem. Off by 1 errors, forgetting the last element in the loop, this kind of stuff. Array index mistakes. Typically give you a very reasonable result, it's just the wrong one. And mistakes in data management, for switching to variable names, reading in the wrong file, this kind of stuff. So all these need, in my opinion, a better link between human and automatic verification, because no amount of automatic checking is going to catch any of these. But we need to help users to do a better job and help to avoid and then find such problems. And again, my first recommendation is to avoid the transcription from informal to formal specifications. And I already talked about digital scientific notations, so yeah. Then you have consistency checks as good old science standard, human proofreading, and then yeah, there's a matter of developing and teaching good style, which simply avoids this. This is not a trivial thing. It will take some time to develop. Okay, so I'll go very quickly about my last part. Actually, I don't want to sell you my digital scientific notation because it's experimental. I'm not. Maybe I'll scrap it one day. I want to sell you the idea of a digital scientific notation, but this is just my first attempt of defining it. So I'm just for concreteness, I say something about it, but I may change everything in there one day. So it's named after Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who in particular attributed all his discoveries in mathematics to the development of notation. He sent a letter to a friend saying that I spent a lot of time in developing notation, and only because I spent so much time in notation, I actually couldn't discover mathematical theorems. His most famous notation that in daily use today is in calculus. And he also was one of the first people who thought about formal logic, formal methods, and formal manipulation, although it couldn't be done mechanically at his time. He talked about the calculus ratiocinator, which was an idea. He never did anything about it. It was just a dream he had. But it comes very close to today's computing and formal logic. So what is my digital scientific notation? It's in a nutshell, it's an algebraic specification language based on equational logic and query writing. I don't know if everybody in the computer business knows this thing more. It's my main inspiration. But yeah, I think some people seem to know it very well. In France, there's about 10% of computer scientists who use it every day, and the rest doesn't know about it. So I don't know. Can't help it. Anyway, you can click the link, you can see it. My application domains for my personal history are physics and chemistry, but I think this should work more generally for models based on continuous mathematics. So you have a term, it looks a bit like computer algebra. So you have a term algebra with rewrite rules. So you have standard terms, but with certain syntax, and special terms, which are integers, or numbers basically. But the particularity compared to computer algebra systems is that they call this a sorted algebras. Now, for every practical purpose, for me, this is the same as a type. But I've seen a paper which I've not understood a single word which goes about why this is something very different. So I kept the term to be on the safe side. You don't really care. Call this a type if you want. For me, it's okay. So you have something like types, but these sorts have a kind of order, subsort order, in the form of a direct acyclic graph. But it's different from standard types standard type systems today, because they are absolutely not related to what the terms look like, to the way they are constructed. So you can decide, you can arrange your things as you want. You can simply define a new term and say, okay, this is now an integer. And there's a kind of, in this system, there's a mixed static dynamic checking system, which I think is quite interesting and quite well adapted to the needs of my kind of work. Because I'll actually show you this as an example. So these are two parts of the type of my sort hierarchy. This is numbers for exact arithmetic. Here on top of the real numbers, and these are integers and rationals and so on. These are floating point numbers. The two are completely separate. So the distinction between this and this is checked at compile time. It's static typing. But within each graph, you can substitute anything for anything else, and if a rewrite rule fixes it, it's considered okay. So that's actually all I have to say basically. This is not so important. This you can look on the. This is for clicking on it once you get the slides on your computer. As I said, I showed you already quickly an example on those. So this is a sort declaration. Normally there should be. Doesn't work here. So I should show you the sorts. Okay, that's a problem with the HTML. The idea is that, as I said, everything with a blue background, you can't really see the blue background on the screen so well, fortunately. So this is blue, this is blue, this is blue. So this is a sort declaration, this is a subsort declaration. This is a term definition, operator definitions for terms. So this defines multiplication, division, and so on and so on. But this is supposed to read like mathematical formulas. You're supposed to read through a text and say, oh yeah, like you would a mathematical derivation. Except that in the end, here these are rules, translation rules, rewrite rules for simplification. And yeah, I won't go through all these examples. You can have tests. You can verify that a certain rewrite rule produces the right result. Check it's okay. And then you can also do automatic manipulations. You can take a complete term algebra and say, I do a substitution. Here, because this is about physical quantities, they're all the same. I mean, they're all the same. If you have masses or lengths or times, they have the same principle. They can all be added and multiplied with numbers. So I've done this once, and then I've derived automatically different versions from this, and they are shown on green background, so they are computed. They're not written by hand. But they are still supposed to be more or less readable. And yeah, I won't go to all the details, especially since next week they may all be different. So what really matters is the idea of putting this into a human readable document. Okay, questions?
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, in the middle there. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'm a computational chemist, so I'm very pleased to see that. But I started to go into verification validation of courses a couple of last moments. And when you mentioned that you didn't see, there was a, just a problem, and you have an EFT and the functional theory results, people usually assume that something is good when the results between two different codes implementation are in the uncertainty band of the experiments. Is that quite common in other computations?
No, I think quantum chemistry is probably in this range the best because they have very precise experiments. That's why it works. You have rather precise computations and rather precise experiments. So in my corner of biomolecular simulations, you never compute something that can be measured. And certainly not to a precision that you could compare this directly. So this is not a good way to proceed. That is true, but you have quantities, especially for small molecules that you can measure, like energy levels and energy transitions and so on, spectroscopy results which you can reproduce. You always have some things which are observables and others which aren't. So you run the tests on those which aren't. You mean you're also doing tests on the wave functions? No, see.
I mean, there is actually an implementation of code that people from later out and implemented the same model, and now we have two different methods that are used, and one you name beat as implemented in that code package, and what as implemented in the other code package, because it gives completely different results. And if it's the same code,
but that's normal, yeah.
It's a huge problem.
I agree, yeah.
And,
oh yeah, no, wait, you disconnect this completely now.
my question to you is, how does something like F# come into the logic? Your description of if it was a different programming language, which is more functional rather than
you mentioned F# because it's functional, because it has units in its type system.
yeah, it's different from what we use this program.
I don't think this solves the problem in a fundamental way, but except that I said at some point in the end, one way to improve the situation is to have better notations that prevent doing mistakes, and I think this is where it comes in. Whether or not specifically F# or whatever languages actually help to avoid typical mistakes in computational science, I think nobody's ever checked this. I don't think there's any research on mistakes in computational science. But it's certainly a hope we can have, and it would be nice to look at this in more detail.
One more quick question.
So you could expand a little bit about what you perceive to be the difficulty in computing precise parameters that can be measured by physical simulation. I'm aware of, for example, helix tilt angles calculated from solid state NMR, for example, simulations that have not only been as accurate as physical measurements, but also be actually highlighting the problems in the interpretation of the physical measurements. There are other examples as well, and I just wanted to sort of draw out what specifically you were referring to.
I think we have to agree on what we call an experimental result, because structural biology is, from my point of view, the computational interpretation of results. So I remember somebody, I can't give you a reference, but I remember somebody said, for example, for a crystal structure of protein, the information content in the structure is half experiment and half model. So in a sense, so that when I say reproduce experiments, that would be reproducing the original measures from a complete model. So could you take a model of your helix and compute the measured NMR parameters?
You can
without and really get a good agreement.
Yes, that was one of the things that was found with the helix tilt problem, because it was perceived for an extended period of time that there was a gap between the angles that were being proposed by MD and the angles that were being proposed by the solid state NMR. And actually, when you computed the value which was being measured experimentally, you could identify that you could see that actually there was no gap at all. It was just the interpretation experiment.
But it also means the experiment leaves a lot of room about the physical thing you want to deduce from it.
So this was one specific example. There's also partitioning coefficients in terms of how well something will resolve in water versus hexane, which is used very heavily to understanding membrane protein insertion or amino acid insertion into the membrane.
Yeah. So, but still, I think to get back to the question about us, I have never seen, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I haven't looked enough, I've never seen an example where you could really use the experiment, the value to validate the comparison, the results of two different pieces of software.
Not two different pieces of software, I can see that.
So I think we better stop there and
Coffee
continue
break.
the conversation in the coffee break.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.